All right, whenever you are ready.
All right. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. All right, so how often have any of you been walking through the southeast part of the quad, over by Berkeley, and have been confused by a flurry of whistles, the desperate screams of coaches, and the violent thrashing of water, all echoing through the air? Well, these are the sounds of water polo, a sport I love, and one that I'd like to familiarize with some of you who might not know too much about it. I myself have played the sport for going on 8 years this season. I've officiated youth games, I've assisted in coaching, but really why should you care about water polo? Well, it's an Olympic sport that your country is always a contender in, along with international gameplay and championships, both men and women's teams. Both men and women's teams are great. Women's usually finish a little bit stronger in international gameplay just because the amount of competition on men's side is tremendous. But it's a sport that kind of flies under the radar. To clarify, today I'm going to go over the history of the game, basic guidelines, maybe walk you through some gameplay, where water polo stands amongst other sports today, and the disadvantages and benefits of the game. So my first point, history. Back in 1850s England, English resort owners wanted a way to attract some new sporting fellows over to their pool to increase some revenue. So they started playing a game that involved getting a ball probably the size of a softball from one end of the pool to the other. It was pretty much like disorganized rugby in water. You just try to get the ball and place it on the other side. From this point, it took formulation in both the United States and Scotland to reach more of a sport that resembles what we see today. Eventually, they took away the ability to touch the bottom of the floor of the pool, so you had to tread water. The ball increased in size and decreased in weight. Nets and goals were added to actually shoot the ball into. And once this version of the sport grew in popularity, it actually was adopted into the current modern Olympic Games. It was the first team sport to be added. From this point in 1929, an international committee headed by FINA was started that regulated the rules and guidelines of the game and actually helped develop the sport to the point that we see it today. Which brings me to my next point, the actual gameplay. Actual gameplay. The sport itself, you need at least 7 players to play. It is, you have 6 field players and 1 goalie. The parameters of the court are typically 25 meters long by 15 meters wide. The goals are roughly 3 meters by 2 meters high. And the game starts with each team on separate sides of the pool. On the mid, referee's whistle, he drops the ball, and each team designates their fastest swimmer to be the sprinter to go and retrieve the ball at the midline of the pool. The team that gets it goes off to the defender's side of the pool, and they set up an offense. Typically it's 3-3, and the goal is pretty much to keep spacing and distance, pass the ball around, try to get an advantage on the defense, and either set up for a high percentage shot or to get the ball into this guy right here, your whole set, who's pretty much like the center in basketball. He's the person that positions himself right in front of the goal and is usually going to be your strongest, best player. Now there's a lot of different kinds of positions in water polo, but here we call them drivers, whole set, and whole guard. Everyone else is just defender, and this is pretty much going to be your all-star player if he's good. My position specifically is whole guard. I try to guard that person and get my ass kicked. Pretty much, that's my job. And there's a bunch of fickle rules. I know a lot of people that can't stand to watch it just because there's so many whistle blows and they really can't keep track of what's going on. If you're fouled outside of this line right here, you can immediately pick the ball up and shoot it. If you're inside and you do the same, you're not ejected. It's an offensive foul. Where our team strives is through 6-on-5 power plays. You get another player ejected, which they have to sit out for an entire shot clock, and you get to set up with a man up. And through here, that's where we score most of our goals here, and how we're actually a pretty good team. So water polo, amongst other sports, it has remained somewhat in the background compared to other sports here. It's not nearly as popular as it is in Eastern Europe. Teams like Croatia, Hungary, Serbia, they all dominate international gameplay. If you look at Olympic history, Croatia won last year, 3 years in a row, Hungary won, and it's a huge sport in Eastern Europe. But water polo as itself is a difficult sport, and you need a certain amount of equipment. You need a large pool that can accommodate the size of the court. And but here, a report by Bleacher Report studied all the toughest sports in the world, and actually put water polo as the hardest sport to play, taking into consideration the amount of skill, the amount of endurance, the physicality of it, which leads me to some of the disadvantages of the game. It's extremely physically demanding, and it's based on several fundamental necessities that you have to be able to play. You need to be able to swim, tread water, have a certain degree of strength and hand-eye coordination depending on your position. Also, it is a very physical sport and can sometimes be pretty nasty. What you see these guys doing here, if you do this to someone, you're going to be ejected. Most of the nasty stuff goes on underwater where refs can't see it. I've had knuckles broken, fingers ripped out of their sockets, broken nose, plenty of black eyes. If you want to be a good player, you kind of have to embrace the fact that you're going to get hurt. But it shouldn't stop you from playing the game because it's a lot of fun. And another disadvantage, rules are constantly changing. Like this year, for example, a new rule got put in place where you cannot face your defender if the ball gets placed to you. You actually have to not push off, but turn yourself and receive the ball. Otherwise, it'll be an offensive foul. That just started this year. It's really annoying. And my last point that I'd like to make is a huge benefit. It gets you in a shape. It's very good for you. In 8th grade, I was clinically obese. I weighed more than I do now when I was 5'6". And I give a lot of credit to water polo for that. So with all this in mind, in conclusion, I hope I maybe familiarized you with somewhat of a new sport if you didn't know it. I showed you the history of the game, the guidelines, walked you through a little bit of gameplay, and it showed you the disadvantages and benefits of the sport. But I can sit here and talk about water polo all day. But the only way for you to really understand it is to go out and experience it yourself. Thank you.
So, Rachel, share with us your thoughts, please.
Okay. Well, I thought it was really informative. I thought that I liked that he used his cards for reference, that he would glance at them to remember where he's at, but he wouldn't stare at them, and he would still make eye contact with the audience. I felt there was a lot of information on water polo, like the history, and at first when he started talking about the advantages, I thought it might border persuasive, but then he also talked about the disadvantages, which made it more informative to me and not taking a side. One thing is that he did say a lot, and it was kind of distracting for me personally, because I say a lot. Did I say it?
No, it's all right. It's okay.
And then just one thing I would think to improve it is that I felt the intro could have used another slide in between. He showed more slides throughout, but the intro could have used more visual.
I had one. I forgot to put it up.
Yeah, it looked like a couple of them slipped by there,
Yeah.
in the opening section. All right, I like the visualization at the beginning. The horse in the pool was kind of cute, and the reference to the activities at the pool area in the southwest corner of the campus, I thought, or the southeast corner of the campus, I thought was fine. So you did a nice job trying to create a justification for us listening to this, talking about how it's Olympic sport now, our country competes in it, that sort of thing. You could probably do a little bit more on that, but it was, I think, a pretty solid start. We know what the topic is. I'm still not exactly sure what your end goal for the material is, except that maybe it's, to introduce us to this subject, and that should have been a little bit clear. There's actually a pretty good preview of what the supporting material is going to be, but it really just felt like we dove into the material, and I'm going, well, okay, I know the subject's water polo, but the supporting material, for instance, I'm going to talk about history, I'm going to talk about the strategies or sport, games that are played, I'm going to be talking about, the competitions that go on, that sort of thing. You mentioned the rule changes, it just feels like you're kind of all over the place on it, and so even though it's organized topically in those categories, I'm trying to figure out, well, how do all of those categories fit together? And that needs to be a little bit clearer. I did hear one or two supporting sources, and I think you need to be a little bit more consistent on that, especially early on when you're giving us the historical data. It gets a little overwhelming in the one section where you start explaining the positions in the game and the layout of the court and some of the strategies, and then we're talking about rules, and I tell you what, that's probably a speech in and of itself, and then I think you could probably develop those things and it would make a little bit more sense. Trying to cram all that into 2 minutes in the middle of the speech, I think it got a little overwhelming. It's hard enough trying to remember the names of some of the role players that they're doing, much less, what the strategies are or what the technical, like you start talking about fouls inside of the line, outside of the line, this is this kind of foul, this is that kind of foul, and I'm going, what, huh, what? And it's just, it's too much without context and some examples, and that I think you'd need more time for. So if you were doing the speech again, I'd say you could maybe do the historical information as your attention device in the introduction, get that out of the way, and then your purpose could be to explain the basics of the game of water polo and how it's played. And that would have been, fine. Obviously, it's not a demonstration speech because we can't get you in the pool here and have you swim around and show us how to do those things. On the visuals, like I said, I think everybody, it was noticeable that you had a couple slides that you kind of skipped over, and they probably would have helped you transition a little bit more in the beginning of the speech. But they were interesting. I thought when you showed the one with the playing field laid out and where the players would be, you referred to that pretty effectively. Like I said, I just think there's a little bit too much you're trying to do in that period of time that you were there. And the one where there were the injuries, I thought that illustrated the points pretty well. Very dramatic and depressing. Oh yes, let's get the pool full of blood. That sounds good. Well, I guess it's better than a pool full of urine. So
yeah, that's what coin's for.
yeah, there you go. So I thought you did a good job on that. I actually think that the Oz didn't bother me that much. I thought you did a pretty good job speaking to the audience. I like the fact that you moved from one side of the screen to the other at a couple of points to kind of structure the information. Look, I'm talking about this information now. I'm going to move over here and talk about this information. Now we're talking about another thing. So it's kind of a visual transition as you're going through the information, and you're not just locked into the one spot. I think it looks a little bit more natural that way. And I'll tell you what does help at the end is your review, your summary. Even though there's a lot of stuff that gets in the speech and kind of, like I said, you're in a lot of different areas. When you give the summary, it helps it feel a lot more coherent at the end. So I appreciated that. Thank you.